for the music. And the history and the love. I'm glad we didn't end on little boxes because that's pretty dark. So having a hammer of justice, heck yeah, I'm all for that. And Dale, maybe next time we can be your opening act. I extend that to you. I feel really warmed up now. It's nice. Well, welcome to the 7th, mostly annual This Whitworth Life, Whitworth's Untold Stories. I'm Nicole Sheets. I am living the dream, and I teach in the English department here at Whitworth University. It's good to be with you in person. All respect to Zoom, it's good at some things, but wow, to sit in a room full of people and sing or hum and just be together, it's such a gift. And for those who are live streaming, thank you for streaming on the interwebs. We have some printed copies of tonight's program. There's also QR codes floating around. They're under the poinsettias. So there's more details about our readers tonight. This Whitworth Live is an event put on by English 337 Honors Audio Storytelling. They are a very joyful and extremely talented group of people. You'll find their names in the program. The students were involved in every step, and we spent a lot of time talking about whose voices we needed to hear tonight. I'd like to thank Nicole Harris, the teaching assistant for audio storytelling. She is one of the very best Nicoles. And sometimes we'll talk after class and debrief, and then she'll say, "Would you like me to email what we just said?" And I'm like, yes, I would, thank you. She gets me. I would like to thank Allison Breyer in the copy shop. Thanks to Anthony Calabro and his team for the sound and the live streaming. Thanks to Mumu and Jess running the sound. Anthony has really done us a solid in making all of this happen. Huge thanks to Ann Penfield, our program assistant and stand-up comedian. If you were here for the pre-show, I think a few weeks ago I said something cheeky like, "Oh, Ann, we're gonna do this little project, and could you maybe help?" And then, like, after 100 emails later, I was like, "Oh, maybe this was a bigger ask than I thought." I think I vastly underestimated, as I am wont to do, I vastly underestimated how much help I would need. Thanks to the Honors Program and Bert Emerson, the director. Thanks to the College of Arts and Sciences and to the English department. They keep thinking it's a good idea to trust us with a microphone. So, hey, that's great. Keep it coming. Very soon, I will turn it over to our first reader. And then after that, our MC, Dr. Leonard Oakland, will make a few brief and winsome remarks. He's going to be giving us commentary about each of the stories. You can find Leonard's bio in the program. It is hard to think of someone who has lived more of a Whitworth life than Leonard Oakland. So it's really a delight to hear from him this evening. In the audio storytelling class this semester, one of the questions we've been thinking about is, what is the role of the storyteller? Jad Abumrad is one of the producers of Radiolab, and if you haven't listened to this show, it is really a wild experience for your ears. Jad Abumrad claims, quote, "The job of a great storyteller is to lead people to moments of wonder," end quote. Katie Davis, a former NPR journalist, offers another answer to this question. Davis states, quote, "I am a keeper of stories that guide. I capture the stories and keep them in trust for my community." Davis has transitioned from a journalist to more of a commentator, or what she calls, quote, "a witness participant," keeping in mind what writer James Baldwin said, that a witness is at times called to testify, end quote. Tonight, we look forward to the wonder, the guidance, and the many other gifts our storytellers have for us. Please join me in welcoming tonight's first reader, Dr. Kamesh Sankaran.
The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. Jesus said that to a curious but confused Jewish teacher Nicodemus to explain the difference between birth through natural means and through the Holy Spirit. Like Nicodemus, I should have known better but didn't. When I encountered Christ, I was doing a PhD in aerospace engineering at Princeton. Exactly the kind of person who ought to know things like airflow. Yet I was utterly perplexed by what happened. Like Nicodemus, the source and consequences of being born again were beyond my comprehension. Looking back at those events more than 20 years ago, I now see with greater clarity how God was working behind the scenes. My struggle against Christ, fueled by my pride and ignorance, was utterly futile. I'd grown up in a small city in southern India. My brothers and I were first-generation high school graduates. So the fact that I ended up doing a NASA-funded PhD in advanced space propulsion at Princeton is nothing less than a miracle by itself. Yet, like many miracles recorded in the Bible, it had a deeper purpose: to draw me to Christ. My hometown is prominent in Hinduism because a renowned monastery and historic temples are located there. Hinduism is in the soil, the water, and the air. I grew up in a devout Hindu family that was inseparable from the highest echelons of religious leadership. My commitment to Hinduism only grew deeper when I left home at the age of 11 to study at a boarding school that was run by a religious leader. I excelled beyond the expectations of my family and my teachers in Hinduism. Paul's claim to the Galatians that he advanced in Judaism beyond many of my own age among my own people could have been said about my progress in Hinduism. So not surprisingly, many years later when I arrived at Princeton, I became a leader in its Hindu Students Association. Prior to arriving there, I'd had some exposure to Christianity. I remember seeing icons and statues in Orthodox churches and thinking them to be like the gods that I had worshipped as a Hindu. As one who had intellectual curiosity about world religions, I studied Christianity to some extent, but I didn't consider Christianity to be fundamentally any different from Hinduism, but merely a different religion for a different society. But my respect for Christianity had its limits. I had a deep disdain for Christian cultural and moral values that, like most Hindus today, I considered to be a form of debauchery. In my mind at that time, Jesus could perhaps be one in the pantheon of gods, but really no more. My commitment to Hinduism was also strongly nationalistic. So this resulted in a deep mistrust towards religious conversion, especially conversion to Christianity. Despite that, God was at work behind the scenes. Preparing me to receive Christ actually happened through a friendship with a fellow PhD student. Working alongside him for more than 12 hours a day, I respected him as a colleague and eventually became good friends with him and his family. On a few occasions, Christ and Christianity came up. On one such occasion, sensing that I was missing something, my friend explained to me that Jesus Christ died bearing our sins to reconcile us to God. That was something that I had never heard before, and it offended me. I was a deeply religious person, someone diligently striving to be good. How could my friend think that someone like me was a sinner in need of salvation? Yeah, I had problems, but wasn't I capable of fixing them myself? Why would I need Jesus to bear my sins? Out of respect for a friend and a fellow researcher, I asked him to provide evidence for his explanation of the cross. So he encouraged me to read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis because he was an author that I was familiar with other popular works. Sure, I started reading it, but I quickly realized that I need to go directly to the primary source. So I gave my friend some money and said, "Can you buy me a Bible so that I can get to the root source?" Okay. Over the next few months, I started reading the Bible, and other stories from the Bible came up in our conversations. The parable of the prodigal son didn't sit right with me. Partly because God was not supposed to be like this profligate father in the story, but also because I identified more closely with the older son who did not seem to need grace. And then there was this story of a man who defrauded his own people and conspired with foreign occupiers and collected taxes of his own people. And yet, in Jesus' telling, this man had a better outcome before God than a faithful religious leader who followed all the rules. It blew the fuse of my understanding of God. I had to get to the bottom of this Christian thing. In tandem with my intellectual quest, God was showing me the futility of kicking against the goads, as Paul talks about his own pre-Christian life. In a brief but decisive period, God exposed my false sense of self-sufficiency that I had based on prosperity, academic success, and strong relationships with my family. In a short order, I experienced unexpected and unexplainable failures in each of those areas: financial, academic, and relational. Those blows came from different directions and from different human sources, but their cumulative effect on me was devastating. By removing all the frail crutches on which my life was built, God exposed the reality of my profound weakness, especially my utter inability to fix relational brokenness. I didn't like the possibility that I truly was frail and flawed. That revealed something about me that I didn't like. I was in more pain than I had imagined possible, but I was devoid of the props on which I was accustomed to resting. I decided that my life was not worth living and planned to end it. In the midst of that darkness, a voice within me spoke out of nowhere. This is why Jesus had to die for you. It came from nowhere. But at that moment, the brokenness of my life pointed to a greater brokenness in my relationship with God. I had nothing to lose. So I picked up the phone and called my friend and asked him if I could attend church with him. It turned out that the voice that spoke to me came on a Sunday morning, just as my friend and his family were leaving their house to attend worship. That morning, I heard the gospel and responded with a broken but open heart.
It's so wonderful to hear Kamesh's story. I've known him for a number of years, and yet, who at Whitworth doesn't know of Kamesh's profound faith? And yet, there are parts of this story I'd never heard before. And I think that in certain ways, what Kamesh just talked about is very much a Whitworth life story. Whitworth has been, for me, for you, for Kamesh, it's been a place where faith has been at the center of our considerations, and all of us have gone through re-understandings and redesign sometimes radical, sometimes very mild redesign of faith. But I think this was a story that is a deeply Whitworthian story. Well, let me turn to our next reader, my beloved colleague of 4 decades. Dr. Leanne Chaney came here, and I didn't realize, Leanne, that you arrived with Mount St. Helens ash, but you did. And I've worked a number of times with Leanne Chaney over the years and recognize her great love for Whitworth, her great love for plant life, and her great love for the physical campus of which we are so much a part. Dr. Leanne Chaney.
Sometimes you can laugh about things later. Many years ago, I was teaching a non-major botany course that dealt with how people have used and now use plants. One unit included the plants that people have used to make paper or other materials for writing, printing, or artworks. We talked about the importance of books in many human cultures and their place in education. Because we covered a lot of information, students were allowed to bring notes with them to the exam, but they had to turn them in with the test. One student handed me her exam and the pages that she had cut out of the textbook. She didn't seem to make much use of those pages, given her exam score. At the time, the irony of that lack of respect for books and all that they represent just took my breath away. But I can look back now and chuckle. One spring, a senior was in a class he didn't like, but needed for a department requirement. He fussed most of the semester. Right after he finished the final, he went outside of Johnston and nailed his book to a pine tree, where it remained for several days. Sometime after graduation, we got it removed, so I know that he did not retrieve it. He went on with his life, but some years later, I was surprised when he showed up at my office unannounced. He didn't really apologize, but he seemed to regret the book nailing event. I think he had become a teacher and maybe needed that book. So this is a side note. You need to remember, this was back when good students kept their books because they couldn't Google information. I have to smile when I remember that one. Then there was the Yellow House year. It was 1998 to 99. Whitworth had been trying to secure grant funding to renovate Johnston, which was the only science facility we had. Multiple grant cycles had passed without any success. And then we were thrilled to be awarded funds, but concerned about the fact that we only had 2 years to get the money spent. There was a flurry of meetings with architects and contractors and thousands of decisions and compromises to make on top of all the regular work of an academic year. Then, as soon as spring classes were over, we had to empty all of Johnston except for one chemistry lab space. Lab supplies not needed for fall courses were stored in big containers like those on ships backed up now at ports in California. The biology labs we were able to teach were held in what had been the old dining hall, which had just been vacated because the hub was brand new. Physics did some labs in the building that now has the International Student Center. For safety reasons, chemistry, though, had to run all of their labs in Johnston, so they had to just use that one room. There was no health science program at the time, so we didn't have to find spots for them. But we did have to find places to put the faculty and staff from Johnston. And that spot was a private home next to the field house. It was simply the Yellow House. The building is long gone now, replaced by parking, but for several months that year, it served as office spaces for about 10 faculty and 2 program assistants. They just moved us over there without doing much other than running wires for phones and computers. My office was in an upstairs corner bedroom, flowered wallpaper and lace curtains. 2 faculty shared the master bedroom. One was in the breakfast nook. At least 2 were in the basement beyond the laundry area. So you can imagine what this was like for students during advising week, or when they came anxious or distressed to meet with their professors. Then, at the end of January, we had 1 week to move back into Johnston for spring courses. The halls were stacked head high with boxes of lab materials, offices full of boxes of books and files and office supplies. Then it was, let's have an open house for trustees and donors and share how wonderful this is. Of course it was wonderful. We were excited and grateful and exhausted and barely keeping our heads above water. If we hadn't laughed, we'd have been crying.
I love this kind of reminiscence about the history of the physical campus. I'll go back a little farther. When I came here in 1966, this road coming in straight in the gate went all the way back past the brand new Johnston Science Center, because the science people were still in low temporary buildings, which is roughly where Robinson Science is now. It later became the art building. Those were days when there really was a loop. You know, we call it the loop, but it was a road that went in front of the library, in front of Lindemann, in front of the dining hall. That's where the dining hall was. Now it's Weyerhaeuser. Turned in front of Mac. You could see a little piece of it left. Plowed through the chapel. Chapel wasn't there. And came up this side in front of Warren and Dixon and the administration building. That was the loop. And that was much used by students at speeds not permitted by the campus cop. Okay, so that's a little bit of reminiscence about the Leanne Chaney has inspired me too. Let me turn to our next reader. Rico was a student I met in one of my literature classes, and I learned a good deal about him and his native culture, and especially his interest in teaching and stabilizing the language of his people. I'm not sure what he's going to read about, but I want to welcome Ricardo Wool, for his piece.
Thank you, Leonard. I'd also like to take a moment to thank Kamesh for my outfit today. I was planning on wearing something cozy until I showed up to class, and he had that ungodly drip with that suit. So I was like, oh, I can't show up in jeans and a hoodie. So, anyways. Gushdehin ach sayi, tleit chenach, Ricardo Marcelo Whirl, Kagwantan nachatsati, Shungu kedi yadi, Dakdain tan dachkan, hunia kawudach. My name refers to the water off the dorsal fin of a breaching killer whale, and my English name is Ricardo Marcelo Whirl. My people are the Kagwantan of Glacier Bay, Alaska. My father's people are the Thunderbirds of Klukwan, and my grandparents' people are the Sea Pigeons of Glacier Bay. Thank you all for coming. Here's our story. An Indian Sunday dinner. I know you're all expecting some grand story about the plight of the modern Indian, how that inspired me to take up the pen and write down some amazing spiritual insight that will light a fire under the red and flat asses of the next generation to take up arms and burn this colonial monster to the ground. Or maybe you're eager to hear a teary story of how this merciless Indian savage found salvation in the empty promises of a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus at Tuesday Chapel. Perhaps I'm only feeding into your hunger to hear a token Indian war cry atop his clan house that will soon be replaced with a bespoke coffee house. I'm hungry. All of us are. That's all we are. Every young Indian's first hunger is at their grandma's dining table. No Indian in their right mind wakes up Sunday morning hungering for decolonial justice. We wake up hungry for Spam, eggs, and rice. We wake up hungry for grandma's love. We wake up hungry to hear uncle's story about that fish that got away. At grandma's table, we learn how to make a pot of rice, how we like our coffee, what the tribal council is supposedly up to, what our real names are, who Robert is and what his rules of order are, how long to bake a fillet of king salmon, how to pronounce hors d'oeuvres, the current voting districts of rural Alaska, what it means to be Tlingit in a white man's world, how to hold a salad fork. Grandma's table turns into a conference table every Sunday, bringing together congressmen, writers, fishermen, carvers, painters, weavers, singers, dancers, anthropologists, uncles, aunties, drunks, Catholics, drunk Catholics, clan leaders. Every Indian under the sun that has been or will be is sitting at the table asking, "What's for dinner?" It was there I once sat and asked the same question. To my complete horror, she smiled and said, "Ach, Dachkan, most precious grandson, whatever your heart desires." Thank you.
Whatever your heart desires. That's wonderful. Thank you, Rico. And thank you for the kind of inspiration you brought to my class as well last year. So let's welcome Emily Marmon, who's also in English, and hear what her story is that she's ready to share with us. Emily, please.
The story is called Shoulder Pads. There's a lot of power in a blazer with shoulder pads. It's like when I put it on, my shaking hands become calm, my nervousness becomes discernment, and I can advocate for myself better than I could have before. I wear a blazer when I need an extra boost of that power, or when I sense that in an upcoming meeting, I will be spoken over. I treat the blazer like a guard for gaslighting and for people who want to cross my boundaries. There's only been a few times when I've worn a blazer with this purpose at Whitworth. One of these times, I got ready for the day in a way I usually don't. I woke up, I showered, made coffee, breakfast in the usual way, but today I put on a pantsuit. It's the outfit I imagine I would wear if I was ever so lucky to have an interview for law school. But it also, most importantly, it has a blazer with shoulder pads. I got my shoes out of the closet, the ones that I keep in a box until I'm ready to wear them. black heels with a rounded toe, and the same hue as the pantsuit. I was ready. So ready that I could have gone outside into the world, but instead I sat at my computer, shoes on, and clicked join at the meeting. The voice that spoke first was gruff, glottal, and rough, but still holding on to that robotic Zoom tone. The speaker took time to take charge of the meeting, to introduce himself and the other board members present, then asked us to introduce ourselves. My club, Generation Action, had been working with the Pirate Pride Club to acquire a meeting with a committee with the Whitworth Board of Trustees. It took more than a whole semester. If you didn't already know, Whitworth doesn't currently protect sexual orientation and gender identity in their non-discrimination policy for faculty due to a religious exemption. Our clubs had been working together to try to address this oversight and protections because we recognize the protections queer students have are not shared with the faculty protections. We saw this as a threat to our mentors, a hypocrisy against an institution that says in every admissions pamphlet and Why Whitworth Day, how diverse Whitworth is and wants to be. Our teams worked tirelessly for months in order to achieve this meeting with the board, and it was not easy to come by. Unfortunately, I'm unsure of what details I'm allowed to share from this meeting. There is risk involved in me sharing this even now. Please know that there is so much more that has happened. I can't say who was in the meeting other than it was high-ranking Whitworth officials and members of the board. I can, however, explain the way that statements made in the meeting affected my emotional state, my mental well-being, my physical state, and the ramifications for queer identities on campus, both faculty and students. Our meeting was over in an hour, and in it, my hands were in fists the whole time under my desk, out of view of my camera. But my face was smiling, nodding, and being told the kind of things you congratulate a toddler for. Whitworth openly uses the language of the narrow ridge that the institution strives to sit on. But that's just hard imagery to use when I know that protecting people by law in a way that makes them simply equally protected with the rest doesn't cause the school to fall off the ridge. I was disgusted with the kind of comments being made from representatives of a university that openly claims to want a diverse campus with a Christian mission. Not even my blazer could shield me that day.
Thank you, Emily. That's a wonderful story. That's a story, that's part of this Whitworth life that I am so pleased that you have played a part in, have put yourself on the line for. So much has changed in the 56 years that I've spent at Whitworth, and certainly queer identity is one of those real changes. While we are not there where you want to be or where I would most want to be, we are so much more than we have been. And I rejoice in that, in this my last months of teaching at Whitworth, to see the kind of changes that have taken place. I'll tell one story. Going back to the days of the anti-Vietnam War protests on campus when Dale Soden could give me the exact date, but we put up microphones. I didn't do it. Microphones were put up around the campanile, and classes were called off for the day. Instead, there was a teach-in, and various speakers talked about the war, and anybody could get up. There were those who favored the war and the American involvement in Vietnam. There were those who very, very strongly opposed it. Nicole mentioned that I spoke here the first years, I guess it's 7 years ago, and I told a story that came out of that, a bizarre set of incidents of my involvement in the with anti-war students at Whitworth in those days. But this was a place, I still remember, a group of students who pitched a tent in front of the administration building in protest to say, we want change at Whitworth and we want it now. And this one guy walked over to me and he says, you know what I hate about this school? You ask 3 times and they give it to you. You can't get a decent movement going around here. Well, that's not the story that Emily told us just now about asking 3 times and you get what they ask. But I do want to say a great deal. So much has happened in these many decades here at Whitworth as it changed from a very different kind of small school out here on the beyond the north edge of Spokane when I got here, to the place that we value today with all of its bumps, with all the distance that it has yet to go and to grow. So let me now welcome our next reader, our second to last reader, Madison Goddard. Thank you, Madison.
Thank you, Leonard. I do want to say before I start, just a thank you to Emily for sharing that story. As a member of the LGBTQ plus community at Whitworth, I'm very grateful for people like Emily who are doing amazing advocacy and activism on campus, and change happens because of people like Emily, so thank you. Without further ado, I'm excited to share a story with you all tonight. It is titled Crash Course. My COVID life began with a hospital stay. Well, my COVID life first began in that same flurry of disbelief and loss that many of yours likely did. School moved online, my lacrosse season was canceled, and I had just found out about the death of a childhood best friend of mine. Needless to say, I needed to be home. The night before driving back down to California, a snowstorm had arrived after weeks of no snow in Spokane. I'd already found 2 other Californians to make the drive down with me, and I stubbornly encouraged us to stick to our plan of leaving at 6 a.m. to brave the windy, snowy, and icy conditions. We did not make it very far. The crash goes like this. I am behind the wheel. We are in the middle of nowhere, Oregon, and I'm passing a semi. I hit a patch of black ice, and the 3 of us in the car are absolutely silent, except for my repeated use of an expletive under my breath, and I'll let you choose whichever one you prefer I'm using. Somehow, I maintain control of the car long enough to pass the semi, but then the back of my car hits the center divider, then the front, then the back again, and suddenly we are in a game of pinball, hurling towards the other side of the highway. I don't know at what point we start rolling, but suddenly we lurch and we are upside down and in midair. In that split second, I somehow remember a recent conversation about how drunk drivers often end up less injured in car accidents because their bodies are so loose. And so I consciously make my body go limp. Miraculously, we land on the wheels. I spit glass and dirt out of my mouth. Ashley hands me my glasses and my phone, both unharmed, and we gather ourselves enough to call 911 and take inventory. Ashley may have hit her head. Patch is shockingly uninjured, but it doesn't take long for me to realize that my left arm feels like a bag of loose bones, and it isn't responding to any of my commands. I decide that is a problem for the paramedics. So I let the waves of adrenaline and shock just do their thing. With my window shattered and my door ajar, I watch the snow fall on my lap like a blanket. And I notice a shockingly large amount of blood on my car door. I laugh and point it out to Ashley, whose eyes tell me she's very glad that my trauma response in this moment is laughter. The paramedics eventually arrive, and they make it abundantly clear that this will not be a get a cast and go home scenario for me. Now, there's a lot of realities that I've been taking in and adjusting to in the last 48 hours. First, it was this pandemic thing. Then it was losing Catherine, and now I'm in a hospital. The surgeon at that first hospital sends me in an ambulance off to a more prestigious hospital in Portland, and another few days pass before I get surgery to fix up my very snapped humerus bone and to stitch up the mess of lacerations I got from shattered glass. Then my dad and I hop on a plane while I am hopped up on Oxy, and I finally make it home. In the days and weeks following the accident, people ask me if my life flashed before my eyes. It didn't. I was so sure I was not going to die, which you could call premonition, but I will call 20-year-old arrogance and denial. And then, even after I returned home, I didn't feel as though this was some sort of life-altering, life-shaping event. In fact, I very much did not want it to be. I wanted to feel functional if the world around me wasn't going to. But that wasn't possible, and it took over a year for the grief of that time to hit. A year. From this perspective, this Madison standing in front of you, there's a lot of things I would say to that Madison from almost 2 years ago. If I could go back and offer some wisdom to her, it would not be to say that she'd be okay. Madison, from a year and a half ago, already knew that. She wouldn't accept anything other than okay. She barreled through the rest of the semester online, and ignoring the encouragement of several professors to take incompletes and properly allow herself to heal. She dove back into work that summer, proving she was just fine and as good at her job as she'd ever been. That Madison knew she had survived something that she shouldn't have, and all she knew how to do was keep surviving. So she kept surviving. She kept barreling through, and then she was back in Spokane, back at Whitworth, back with the lacrosse team, except her arm wasn't fully healed and she couldn't play. And then it was winter and she had to drive again in the snow. She could no longer pretend like she was okay. Grief confronted her, and she finally looked it in the eye. So, no, I would not tell the Madison, who was freshly home from the hospital, that she'd be okay. I would want to tell the Madison who had to move back home, whose arm was now filled with 8 inches of titanium, and who lost her friend Catherine, that she should stop trying to be okay, because she's enough, even and especially when she's not okay. Thank you.
What wonderful stories. What do you tell yourself Do you tell yourself you're going to be okay? Do you tell yourself maybe stop trying to be okay? This is to me a profound story of crash and heal. There have been a number of profound stories tonight, and I've been soaking them up, from Dale Soden's singing all the way to now, when I get to introduce Mama Beans. And we have known each other for these decades. Here is a spiritual presence who knows what it is to crash and what it is to heal. And she has brought a great deal of healing to us on the campus. Welcome, Mama Beans.
And I'm sitting there listening to all these stories. I'm like, I gotta follow all of this. First, I want to say thank you for your sacred stories. They are very profound. They hit the heart, they sting, and they make you come alive. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I love my name, Stephanie. It means crowned with righteousness. My father used to tease me because when I got in trouble, he would remind me, you know what your name means, right? And I'd smile and says, yes, Daddy, because I'm a daddy's girl. Over the years, I've been called many names, some good and not so good. But I've had names like Mama, Mother, Steffi, Stephanie, Grandma, Gigi. These names are very special to me. There is a special name of endearment, and passed me and said, hello. And I quickly responded, hello, what's your name? And we took a few moments, and then I said, come here, give me a hug. And he was glad. He came over and he hugged me, and we met, and I kept walking. Several weeks passed when I saw this young man again, and this time he had 3 handsome little boys with him. And he introduced them to me. And we started up another wonderful conversation, and I ended up giving them all Mama's hugs. Well, several weeks passed, and I saw him again, and he said, do you mind if I come and talk to you sometimes? Sure, I said. Stop. Said that he'd been down for quite a while. It had only been a few weeks that I saw him, and he looked okay. He said, you know, it's really hard being a single parent of 3 busy little boys. He continued his conversation, and he began to tell me that every time he saw me, his heart would stop and leap and jump, and that he was glad to see me. I said, wow. Then he said, that personal question? Sure, I responded. And out of his mouth, he said, may I call you Mama Beans? I smiled. And then I looked at him and said, why do you want to call me Mama Beans? You remind me so much of my mother. The way you treat people, your hugs, your smile, and the way you hug me and my sons. And when we meet, I'm excited. I said, wow, if this is what I've done for you, then I need to meet your mama. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. I wish you could meet her. She's been gone for quite a while. He looked at me and tears rolled down his eyes. You see, she died a while back, and you remind me so much of her. He said, I miss my mama. I got up from my chair and I put my arms around this young man, and he cried and cried and cried, and I said, I'd be honored for you to call me Mama Beans. Well, on that day, Not only did I become Mama Beans, but I also had the joy of loving his 3 little boys over the next years, who eventually became my grandsons. So what is in a name, you ask? Hey, a whole lot. 24 years later, that name is known campus-wide and in the community at large. Moreover, you know that name has a meaning when you are standing in the Colorado airport and somebody says, "Hey, Mama Beans, I love you." And I say, "Wow." What's in a name? When a student from Hawaii says, "Hey, are you Mama Beans?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "You're famous in Hawaii." Again, I said, "Wow." They told me when I came to look you up that you love giving hugs. And I was humbled because truly there is something special about that name, Mama Beans. I hold it dear and close to my heart. Thank you.
What a wonderful set of stories we've had from these storytellers tonight. I want to thank all of you, Kamesh Sankaran and Leanne Chaney, Rico Wall, Emily, Madison, and Steffi, Mama Beans. Thank you for all of this, and you've heard yet another version, yet another set of witnesses to what is life at Whitworth. What does it mean for us to be this community that tries again and again to redefine what it means to be people of faith, what that means to live out with hugs and love, to live out with probing questions, to push back at the Board of Trustees. All of these are part of what it means to live this Whitworth life. Will you please join me in thanking our readers tonight? Thank you all for coming. Thanks to Anne for all her help, but especially thanks to Nicole Sheets for her leadership.
You're dismissed. Thank you so much.